various presenters are here. So, all right, let's call the meeting the Thursday, August 17th, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting. Let's have a roll call, please.
Trustee Hallwag. Here. Trustee Listener.
Here.
Trustee Malopoulos. Trustee Underdog. Here. Trustee Rubin. Here. Trustee Scott.
Here.
President Rowan.
Here. So we have a quorum. We're not live streaming this meeting tonight, but the video recording will be available on the village's YouTube channel. It's time for public comment. This portion of the meeting allows for those in attendance to address the board regarding non-agenda items. If you have an agenda item, wait till then. All comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll notify the speaker when the time is up. Are there any comments on non-agenda items? No. Okay, the next item on the agenda is presentation and discussion of Preservation Commission recommendations regarding the historic preservation of the village of Glencoe. And I'll ask the chair of our Preservation Commission, Peter Van Beckman, to present. Peter, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Yes, it works. Yes. I'm here as representing the entire commission. We have 6 members. Dudley Underdunk is the trustee liaison. And we also have an advisor, and John is our staff liaison. So the purpose tonight is to continue our discussion that we initiated about 2 years ago. And at that time, we talked about the state of preservation in the village and some of the observations that we had. We met again in early 22. We talked some more about the commission's initial recommendations. And since then, some of those recommendations were implemented. Some of the policy items were implemented. And we're here tonight, I'm here tonight to talk about the next 5 recommendations that we have. And so because it's been a while and there's some new members, I have a brief introduction and then about 8 to 10 minutes about the new recommendations. The goal here is for me to stop talking in about 12 to 13 minutes so that we can have a good discussion. So let's step back and zoom out for a second and just talk about values and what makes Glencoe a really special place. And for each of us, I think we could all make a list of what are the top 3 items that really are special to us, whether it's the environment, the lake, the schools, access to government, and the architecture. But all of these, in my opinion, are worthy of preservation in their own way, because it's one of the reasons we all choose to live here. And so architecture is on the list. And in fact, it's on the list of the most recent survey. 61% of the residents felt that it was a high or very high priority. The commission was originally founded in 1990. And at that time, it had 2 levels of landmark status, certified and designated. And in the original ordinance, both levels were eligible to apply to the state of Illinois for a property tax freeze. In 2013, the ordinance was amended and updated, and it's now called certified landmark and an honorary landmark. And in 2013, it was deemed that only the certified landmarks could apply for the property tax freeze. So currently in the village, there are 11 certified landmark properties, of which 9 are residential. They have, as I mentioned, they have the option to apply for a property tax freeze. There's a mandatory review of any alterations or additions by the Preservation Commission. And a demolition permit request for a certified landmark, actually by ordinance, can be stopped. There are 84 honorary landmark properties in the village, of which 77 are residential. and going down. There's an optional advisory review for any changes to the landmark. And there's also a 180-day delay for a demolition permit issuance. And finally, there are about 223 significant historic properties in the village. What's that? Those are properties that could be landmarks. They would meet the criteria, but for many different reasons, they just aren't honorary or certified landmarks. They're just really good architecture. So in all, there's 309 properties that have architectural historic value, which is in the ballpark of 10% of the total village. There's about 3,200 houses in the village, so about 10%. Currently on the village website, there is a story map that everyone on the internet can access. It's through the preservation portal. There are 3 tabs to it. The landmarks is the first one. The second one are the historic significant properties. And the third tab are everything else. So you can see here that there's a map with the locations and then a small image. If you click on a thumbnail image, it'll bring up an image, a larger image of the property and some historic information about that house and the architect and the date and so on. None of these have information about the current owner. This is all historic. Okay. So in the historic significant properties, it's a similar to the other one. In both cases, you can see there's a wide range of distribution of these properties throughout the village. And then the third tab are everything we call non-residential. So historic markers, places of worship, businesses, and so on. The halfway house. Now, over the last 20 years in Glencoe, it's had the highest rate of demolition of the North Shore communities by percentage. Let's let that sink in for a second. It's the highest rate of new construction. Since the village started keeping track of demolitions, it's had about 835, not including this year. And what that means is that about 25% of the housing stock has been replaced. 1 out of every 4. When the commission started to wrap our head around this, we said, what's happening? What's going on? Because it's not only just all of the houses, but it's also the landmarks. And if you look at that same time period, 20% of the overall number of landmarks have been replaced. There's one pending and another one in the wings. So that 20% now doesn't include the pending, so that's going to inch up. The architecturally significant is at 24%, and I think if you put the pending in, my point here is that the landmarks and the significant homes are also disappearing. And that was, to us, was a call to action. We needed to come forward because what's the process today is not altering what's happening. It's continuing. And it's my humble opinion, this is not by design, but it's by market forces. So if we value preservation, we've got to do something. So we're coming tonight with 5 ideas for discussion. The first one is an incentive to reduce the permit fees for landmarks and potentially significant homes, because they represent, as an economic incentive, they represent a relatively small number of the total permits that are submitted. And so the financial impact we are expecting to be quite minimal. But yet, if you're a homeowner and wrestling with the idea of, do I put an addition on this house or do I rip it down and do something new? That's a financial incentive to put into my thought process. The Village of Hinsdale does this now. The second one is the idea of creating a little bit more nuances in the zoning code. And the idea of a landmark and a significant architectural house being able to get a little bit more flexibility in the zoning. For example, the floor area ratio or some of the setback requirements. There are provisions in the zoning code today that allow for some of that. But what this is suggesting is for those particular properties, maybe that could be expanded. The next one is interesting. The contextual design review zoning adjustments were put into the zoning code and they exist today. The intention was that they would be administered by the Contextual Design Review Commission, but that doesn't exist anymore. So we have something in the zoning code, but we can't get our hands on it. So the idea here is if that were in some legalese made available, it could be reviewed by the Preservation Commission for appropriateness and so on. And then the Preservation Commission could make a recommendation to the zoning board for their administration. Okay, but I'm sure you saw that these are pretty granular items and they're in the agenda packet notes. I don't want to get into that because we'll all hit our head in the table. But the point is that they went through quite a process when they were put into the code. They are there already. Let's figure out a way that maybe we can make use of them. Okay, number 3. Specify the requirements for the honorary landmark submissions when they want to make an alteration to a home. And whether it's an addition or a modification of some sort, they need to get a building permit. But currently, the landmark ordinance is silent on what the submission requirements are for honorary landmarks. It's very specific for the certified landmarks. But what's interesting is that, so what we're proposing here is, in addition to all the standard stuff that the building department needs to, to do a good job, we're requesting drawings of the existing and the proposed conditions, photographs of what it is today, identification of what new materials might be being considered, and a statement of design intent. We don't see these as particularly onerous. The next one is a proposal to extend the demolition delay for honorary landmark from the current 180 days to 360 days. Basically double the distance, double the time. The purpose of that is to allow a proper amount of time to have a discussion about alternatives to demolition. And the recent example there is the Booth Cottage. And that took about 230 days, significantly more than the 180 days. And there's a number of people in this room that were involved in that. So it took, I always like to say, it took a village for that to happen. Interestingly, on the North Shore, those communities that have this provision, we are the shortest. Winnetka's at 270, but it's actually closer to 300 by the time they get all the ducks in a row. Kenilworth is at 365, and Highland Park is at 365 if you hit 4 criteria and 180 if it's less. Glencoe doesn't rate a landmark that way. We say it meets the criteria, and when those do, it's usually about 3, 4 to 6 criteria. Criteria comes from the National Trust preservation, so they're not arbitrary things. And so we feel it would be more appropriate to be in line with our neighbors on this. And finally, it's kind of a process thing to ask staff to have an automatic notice in your agenda packages when a demolition permit is applied for a landmark, just to keep you aware of that.
Excuse me, just point of clarification on the prior slide. The 180 to 360 you're talking about just for those that are certified or honorary?
Yes. Yeah.
Certified, we can say no.
Yeah,
Yes.
certified is just,
Yeah.
Honorary,
it's really affecting more honorary.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, number 5. And this starts to pull together a number of these ideas. For the ordinance calls for an optional advisory review for any changes made to a landmark. So that's the legal stuff is up there for the an alteration, addition, or modification. In the ordinance, it says no permits for physical modifications of an honorary landmark may be issued without the commission conducting an advisory review. Okay. However, it doesn't say attendance is required. And so it's been our experience that for additions and modifications, owners almost always come to get the commission's thoughts and feedback and advice and whether they need some resources. For demolition applications, it's exactly the opposite. They almost always never show it. They just ignore it. And so what this is requesting is a modification to say for a landmark, you need to come to the meeting. And so this works with some of the other recommendations, because if there's a longer time period and you require meeting attendance, then you can have that discussion. The commission can have an advisory review about a demolition, but what's the point if there's nobody there? So finally on this one, the idea would be to include an information box in the village newsletters that go out about the demolitions and highlight those or indicate which ones are landmarks and which ones are significant properties so that the village residents are aware, because at 61%, they care. Okay. My last slide is a recap of what we just had to facilitate discussion. So at this point, I'd like to step back and open the floor to thoughts, questions, any ideas, reaction?
this is not what I thought I was going to say, but what's the relationship between the problems that you've identified and the fact that Glencoe was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday as the most expensive village?
I've been thinking about it since I heard that. And I don't know, I couldn't read the article, so I'm going to go from what I think it said.
Okay.
I've heard a lot of economists talk about the state of real estate today, that there's a lot fewer homes for sale. Why is that? Because the interest rates have gone way up and people are making the choice to stay where they are in a low interest loan. And that's kind of national. In Glencoe, I think one has to be a little careful about reading the statistics too carefully, because there could have been a recent wave, which our realtor kind of reinforced. There was a number of very high-priced properties that sold recently. And so if you step back and look maybe at a longer period of time, the average would start to come down a little bit. We did take a look at a little more broadly, and I can get back to more specifics because I'm going from memory. But the average price of a house in Glencoe, I think last year was about $1.5 million. And I think yesterday's article was much higher than that. So that to me would suggest that there's been some properties selling in the 7 to 10 million range to pull up. So that said, what's happening here? The tear downs, generally speaking, are much larger. They're being built to the maximum allowable zoning or within an inch of it. And sometimes they're getting zoning bonuses to go beyond. And so, in general speak, they are also cost a lot more than the house that they took down. In all cases, whether that house cost $1 million, then they're putting about $8 million. The research I did was generally, if they can sell the house for about 4 to 5 times what they paid for the lot, that's what they're aiming at. So a house in Glencoe that you might call affordable in the 500 to 600 range, 5 times that, you're going to be 2 to 3 million. Right. So that's, I believe, what's driving that increase.
I read the article. It's not obvious. I mean, the publicity is positive as far as it goes in terms of, oh, isn't this cool? It's not obvious that this is necessarily good for people in Glencoe. One of the houses they featured, they had a picture of it, is just 2 houses from me on Longmeadow, and it was listed a few years ago for $3.75 million, didn't sell, and now it's listed for $5.75, and they showed the picture. So Longmeadow is the new shared road, apparently. That's not necessarily good for me. It just means my property taxes will be higher if they sell for that. So in any event, though, like I said, I just want to know whether there's a relationship. I suppose, and the answer is, if you tear something smaller down and build something big, your housing stock gets more expensive, and whether that's good or bad, it's a fact. It's not necessarily good. As long as our lawyer is back from vacation, and I'm not criticizing, I'm also back from vacation. So there are a number of recommendations which are, sensible as far as they go. Some are more or less controversial. It's controversial to limit what people can do with their property, and so we have to think about that. But my question for our esteemed council is, can we do this stuff without being a home rule community? Because, whenever you start tinkering with what we can do with zoning variances, I think it's very sensible, but can we do it? Or are we going to have to examine each one of these and figure out what can we do, since unlike all of our neighbors, we're not home rule?
Anticipating your question, and we have not talked about, I did look at the 5 recommendations, and on their face, I believe that you can exercise, if you so desire, from a legal perspective, accomplish each of them.
Okay. That's good.
Can I just make one comment, since I do have the Wall Street Journal article right here? And, I too read it, and it was a PR pitch from a broker. And what they're talking about are median list prices. These weren't sales.
Right.
And what we see is strong demand at the lower end. And it's those houses that are 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, 10 million that sit on the market and don't sell and don't. And so when we have the highest median list price, it's because we have this inventory of very expensive homes. And so it kind of distorts kind of the reality of where pricing really is in the community, because it's not there. We're just talking about, some very few homes. I kind of read the article and I thought, it's a little scary when you read these things and you just know that there's just a lot of misinformation or the way it was kind of presented. And of course, it was wonderful to see all the amenities of Glencoe highlighted. And I got emails from people that I know from out of town, mentioning it. But that number is a distortion of really kind of the facts of where sales prices are occurring and where demand is occurring. So anyway, just wanted to say that.
I think the Wall Street Journal company, so they own an outfit that does these analyses, and they were promoting that kind of analysis, which is a little bogus.
Yeah, I don't think it was in the print edition. Like my hard copy, I don't think. It's one of those little online pages.
So, look, these are all sensible ideas. There are a couple of them that are going to be challenged. So that's something easy to think about. Should we extend the by 180 to 365? And my reaction is, okay, I remember back in 1990 when we did this whole historic preservation thing, there's some people came in and went politely nuts over the fact that we were interfering with their property values and their property rights, not theoretical value because they could sell and then get bulldozed. But since so many comparable communities seem to be extending a little, I think we should try that. And it seems 365 days is not out of line. It's not out of line with our neighbors. And we've identified that, we have more bulldozing of these historic properties than some of our neighbors. So let's slow it down. So that seems sensible. It also seems kind of sensible to try to tweak and maybe give a carrot to folks that are not going to bulldoze their houses. But it's, it'll be a little complicated, but let me just say, I think and requiring people to show up, okay, that seems, that's not a horrible thing to do to somebody. So these are all sensible. It's a little complicated as we talk about tweaking things, and it gets more complicated when we talk about how it affects zoning variances. But as I look at this, I think, okay, let's try it. That does put pressure on us to make sensible decisions on what qualifies as a landmark. Because if we start, if we're inaccurate with that or seem heavy-handed with that, that's not what we want government to do. Anyway, I thought we've identified issues, and these seem like modest, sensible, reasonable ways to fix it. And if it's actually true that we can do this without being home rule, then, I'd say, okay.
Can I ask a question? So, Peter, you had identified like 300 houses that were certified honorary and significant properties, correct? So right now, and these recommendations don't impact the vast bulk of them, the significant properties, right? So this is the honorary and the certified. And have we thought about that third category?
I wanted to talk to you all about this because in every meeting we go back and forth with the commission. Because if you see these as fundamentally as incentives to keep it, look at it from that perspective, then we should give them as many carrots as we can, including the significant properties, because those are the ones, honestly, that are most at risk. Because those are the ones that, if I could put a big addition on the back of this house, and some of these historic significant properties are architecturally very important properties. Keck and Keck houses, for example. Just one example. And so to have that flexibility that you could have a discussion with an owner and say, hey, do you know that, maybe you can get a reduced permit schedule, that you can add a little bit more to your house. Make them think it over some more. I think that's the right thing to do. Okay. The other perspective is, well, what's in it for the landmark then? Why should I make it a landmark? And so that's kind of the discussion that we've been having. So honestly, from my perspective, and I think for the commission, if you said all of these would apply to the certified, the honorary, and the significant, I think that could start to make a dent in the flow, the outward bound flow.
If I could, just on that point, trustee listener, I think it's important to distinguish that the honorary landmarks have had some element of self-selection into that status by either them, that the current owner, or a previous owner. The significant properties, that's not the case. The commission has just bestowed that on there. And again, it comes with no real, pro or con, it's just a status that's been bestowed upon it. I think when you talk about including them in some of these elements of the honorary landmarks, the commission's kind of the opinion that it's got to include both sides, right? In order to get the reduced or eliminated permit fees or to get the zoning bonuses, you also have to kind of play by the rules of the demolition delay, right? That's their skin in the game, to reap that benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that helps to answer your question, but in terms of applying these things to those properties, you kind of have to have it both ways.
Yeah, that's what I would think, is that on the one hand, I'd certainly want to let the significant property owners know their potential benefits, certainly if they go certified, because they get them tax-free. Even if they go honorary, they get these benefits, which I am in favor of. I'm in favor of a host of carrots to incent people to do these things, like the carrots. And I think the whole analysis is very thoughtful. And so, to your point, but you do have to accept the downside, which is a 180 or a 360 or whatever the appropriate number of days is, to say, hold on, give us a little time to convince you why maybe you could have most, if not all, of your economics holding on to your house. So spend a little more time trying to find somebody who wants it, whatever, make it bigger than you otherwise would, et cetera. There are other things to make up for the fact you're not just going to bulldoze it and put up the latest McMansion. So I'm in agreement. I think that you ought to stick with the two categories that have to play by the rules, as you said.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that the homes on the 360 list, everything, whether it's certified or honorary or one of the other homes, they were not picked at random. There was a very in-depth survey that was done by professionals in the landmarking industry, as I'll say. Basically people with advanced degrees in historic preservation who did a comprehensive view of the village, but it's been some years, I think, since that was done. I think it was in the 60s, I think even.
It was probably after we did the ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's actually been 3 waves of surveys. One was the original one. That was conducted by Susan Benjamin. It's a fairly famous name. And there was another one conducted, I want to say like 12 years ago by another noted historian. And then the commission went through and walked every street in the village and just said, what about that house? Let's look into that one. There's something, my eyes telling me there's something about this house. And we went back and did some research to see who was the architect, who lived here, and so on. And what we were striving to do is to get it more complete. Because as my understanding was, The first list was limited to 300. There's an artificial limit to it. I got that from somebody who was part of the process at that time. In the time period, a lot of those homes have been torn down. So the original 300, which are in the village file, those are marked with a red folder. They're even called the 300 list. You know, that went down. So when the additional survey was done, we're back up to about 3. Because guess what? They missed a lot, but part of it was they were capped. So how do you make a value?
The point I wanted to make was that it's not just an arbitrary selection, that there's been professionals that have dug into this and it helps build the historic fabric of the community.
So I have a question. So for these significant properties, in terms of the difference between those and the honorary landmarks, the honorary landmark, somebody proactively, an owner proactively sought that designation. Okay, and the only thing they have to give up is this longer lead time before they can do a demo, right? At the present time.
The second, okay, there's 2 questions there. The first one is for a certified landmark, the owner has to be involved and agree to it. For an honorary landmark, that can be nominated without the owner
Okay,
or the owner's consent.
right, okay.
For, in terms of the demolition, certified, frankly, you can't do it.
Right, yeah,
But the honorary is the one that has the delay.
okay, so okay, so I think that sounds different than what.
Yeah, I thought
everything-
honorary was still voluntary. You're saying we can impose honorary status?
It can be done.
Yes.
It's very rare.
It's rare, it's mistakes. It has not happened.
Well,
The 360, then you gotta give me the sign.
I mean, back in the day when we did this, we created honorary and it could be imposed, but there wasn't really much that was imposed. You're called honorary, and so you had to wait, and I don't know that it was 180 days at the beginning, it may have been shorter.
60.
It was shorter, I remember.
60 is the standard waiting period for all properties in the community right now.
And then, that got extended, but honorary was imposed but it was a very minor restriction on what somebody could do with their property. And so that what we're talking about now is expanding the restriction so that it becomes a longer restriction so that you have to go to a meeting, neither of which is worthy of a Supreme Court case on property rights, I don't think. And what the proposal is that the flip side is to get somebody to agree to those restrictions. They get some benefits. And, if you want the even bigger benefit of property tax freeze, then you go for the whole thing. And so this proposal seems like still, it's more than what we used to do, but it's a modest attempt to get, to see if this works.
How many
Can I just say, just to put a little cap on what you're saying, demolition delays have been tested and have sustained property rights challenges in courts.
So, I mean, obviously there would be a point, there would probably be a point if we said you can't demolish for 20 years, you'd have a problem.
That would amount to a prohibition on demolition, which is different than a delay.
So in any event, we can do, this seems like, you've identified an issue. We all think it's serious. I think we all, the village has since 1990 thought that architectural and historic preservation was a good idea. We took baby steps and now we're talking about taking a little bigger step. And it seems, but this is still modest.
What's the difference other than, I mean, if somebody could voluntarily have the honorary, and may, in fact, many of the honoraries may have been voluntary, I would hope. What's the difference between reaching certified versus voluntary? You know, how quick can you throw somebody into honorary if they don't want it versus what they would do if they all went all the way to certified and actually got the monetary benefit immediately? Is it well, you meet 3 factors, you're honorary. You meet 7 factors, you're certified. Is it like that, or is
No,
it
it's
something
not.
else?
It's not. There are so few people that come forward for a certified landmark.
Mhm.
It's difficult to make a generalization. But the commission does not make a judgment based on how many factors.
You can't throw someone into certified. just
Right,
to be
right,
clear.
because that prevents them from demolishing.
Consent
Yes.
is required.
Yeah. So that's really the difference. It's somebody voluntarily saying, I want this to be around forever and a day,
Yes.
and therefore I'll agree that I can't knock it over.
Well, and it's interesting, we're having this conversation because at your meeting at 7 PM, there is a certified landmarks, application on that agenda. I don't think we've had one since, was your house the last certified landmark application we
Yes.
received in
Yes.
2019?
2021.
2021, okay.
It was 2020, St. Paul, and it was 21.
That's good.
I just wanted it for informational
Yeah, it's-
purposes.
but they are rare, I think.
Rare.
I think it's only the 4th since I've been here. So the 4th certified landmark application in 10 years. So it's not a typical process.
So the question, the corollary question to Gary's question is, okay, there are 223 historically or architecturally significant houses that have not been identified. We've seen it, but they're not listed as the sort of voluntary designation. If the carrots that you're proposing are only applicable to somebody that's been designated, how's that going to work? I mean, is the idea that the Preservation Commission, when it sees a demolition request, will rush in and say, hey, before you do this? Or is the Preservation Commission going to set about to start listing the previously turn them into honorary? What's the plan here?
Right. The plan back in 2020 was to notify all of the property owners about this website and that their house had a lot of architectural significance in this village. And then a pandemic happened. And honestly, we were within like about a month of doing this. And it became very clear that preservation of life was more important for quite a while. And so we just stepped back from that. But I think one approach would be to send a note to each of these properties, let them know once let's take a leap of faith. Let's say we're going to do all these things. We'll figure out how to get it done, but let's say that all gets happened. Then we contact these folks and say, look, we value your home. We sure you value your home. Did you know about all these things that in the future you might wish to consider when you want to expand your house or whatever, right? And that at the certified level, explain about property tax freeze. At the honorary level, that opens the door to permit fee waivers, et cetera.
And variances.
Yeah, right. And so there's some carrots that you put on the table to somebody that's no official status at the moment. Because I don't think the right move would be for the commission to come in and say, okay, we're going to landmark all these properties. That's wrong. I wouldn't want to do that. But as a reach out program, I think that would be very appropriate.
So if I were a homeowner, I might say, I'm not prepared and maybe wouldn't qualify for the property tax thing. Otherwise maybe do it because property tax, who knows? But on the honorary, why wouldn't a homeowner say, this is really interesting information. I'll get back to you when and if I decide I want to do a variance. Is that what's likely to happen?
So
That means, to me, that means that the Preservation Commission is going to have to be sort of on this all the time.
But ultimately, I think the commission would be of the opinion from our conversations that that is still a win if a homeowner is considering the fact that they can solve whatever functional living issue they're having in their home by an addition, even though it might require a variance, it requires this step first rather than demolishing to build new to solve that problem.
Okay, I got it. We just won't know.
Yeah.
And if you do get a demo permit, even if it's there in the 60-day category, that'll be the first piece of paper maybe they get back. It's, by the way,
right.
Did you know, before you knock this thing down, did you know there's some significant benefits you might want, if you like your house and you're just trying to fix some things, you might want to do it.
Maybe we should be charging more for demolition permits than we currently do.
Well, that may be too.
I said that 2 years ago.
Steve,
We should look at that too. I mean, just as part of this.
The fee schedule review, let's take a serious look at that.
demolition permit, the way our fee structure is structured, it's not quite that clean. So I think we would have to designate a demolition permit separate from the building permit. Often they are tied together for new construction.
The fee has to relate to the amount of service that the village is providing.
Correct.
We could, and this is where we may have a home rule, not home rule
Yeah.
issue. If we want to have a fee cover more than just the village services. That are,
they have to be tied together unless we're home.
yeah. Home
They
rule,
are
yeah.
tied together today, which makes me think,
Unless.
well, that's what we could look at.
So
By increasing the fee, sometimes other home rule municipalities have increased the demolition fee and used the funds to fund affordable housing or you know.
They
put them
could
in-
fund the carrot.
City of Highland Park.
Right. Fund the carrot.
but the point, because
I don't
we're
know that
not
we can
home
do-
rule,
That's what we'd have to
we'd
review.
have to think about whether we are able to tie the cost of a demolition permit to some village service.
Well, increased review.
Which could include the review by the commission.
Right, increased review.
Or we can call it a
And they're
demolition
legal
tax.
Yeah.
If we call it a tax, then we can use, then the money does come into our general fund. I mean, there are some
We can
creative
look at
ways.
that.
So we should include, that wasn't one of the listed things, but we should include that.
Steve, I had a question as it relates to honorary designations and a modification to the demolition delay. In many cases, most cases, I would say, the properties that have honorary designations did so with an understanding of the rules at that time. Modifying the demolition delay, essentially doubling the demolition delay. Do we have a responsibility to provide an opt-out of some sort?
I'm not that concerned from a legal perspective on that. Anyone,
And that's kind of where I'm asking you the question, is
Yeah.
do we have a legal problem?
they understood the program, when the honorary designation occurred, knowing that our laws can change. There may be a political or policy issue that we want to think about. As you have with other things where people have relied, you've made certain accommodations. So that's a question for you as policymakers. I don't have a legal concern.
I'm not actually shook up about the delay. It's not.
I was
It's not
just-
extreme.
I was just wondering
Yeah, no, it's a good question.
from
Yeah,
a legal
So if
standpoint.
we're okay legally, we obviously will notify people before we do it, so if people come in and object, take that seriously, but I don't think this is gonna result in that kind of reaction.
There was one other item that was not on the list, and I know we're running short of
I
time.
do wanna get to our,
I want
or
to
two.
One item we did not put on the list was a concept of establishing an escrow account for landmarks, for honorary landmark demolition requests that would pay for a third-party review or alternatives to demolition. I believe Kenilworth does this. I think Highland Park does that. Or maybe Lake Forest, whatever. I know Kenilworth does. And the idea is to have a third party look at it, and if you need a structural engineer or a third party architect or some outside of the village employees, saying, okay, Mr. Builder, here are these realistic options that you can look at. The escrow would pay their services. And the escrow would be put forward at the time of the demolition application. We didn't include that because the more we started to look at that, so many issues bubbled up. I couldn't even begin to explain coherently all of the potential ramifications. But the fact that Kenilworth does it is very interesting as a non-home.
It would be part of the demolition fee, and a portion of it would be set aside for paying for this third party. I think that's how it would be. So I think it's tied into the discussion of where the demolition fee is.
All right, well, unless there's anything else, I think there's sort of a clear idea from the assembled board that we like these ideas and we should look at, ordinance changes that are necessary to give it a shot.
A question for you, just from a practical standpoint, with respect to those ordinance modifications, it's something that the board is ready to proceed with at a board meeting for action, or should it be something that comes back to the board for discussion? I mean, it could be either, we could be both, frankly, it could be on the agenda for action and then you ask for further information.
So do we need to send this to the zoning board, zoning commission? I think we do.
Is this in the zoning code? I think it's
Some of
not.
it, well, some of it may be.
Some of the contextual design review is in there.
That part of it is.
Well, also giving them better benefits under zoning is.
That's the piece.
That needs some study before that gets rolled out, because right now you can get 20% more for the landmarks. Is it 25%? Is it 30%? And we've done some studies on that, but to be responsible, I would want to have some more conversation about that with the zoning folks, with you all,
And the commission, I mean,
and the commission.
before they spend a lot of time, yeah.
The way we do this, I mean, so in order to do zoning changes, we have to send it to the zoning board, zoning commission to have a, public hearing. And the longer we wait to do that, the longer it takes. So, I would be willing, as long as we have a pretty good idea about what we have in mind, to, send it. I think the next step is not necessarily a village board discussion where we just pre-decided everything. We should get the benefit of the Preservation Commission and the Zoning Commission on all of these, and then send it back to us, and then we'll do it. But I think we have a pretty clear understanding of this group as to what we're thinking. We have not nailed down all of the minutia, but the way our system works, I don't think we have to. I think that's why we send it for a public hearing to the to the zoning commission. So I'm back to you.
Under your code, and I just confirmed this with Heather, you need to, as a village board, not a committee of the whole, formally send the matter to the zoning.
Yeah, so I'm thinking instead of having a big, long discussion, we should just tee it up to send to the zoning commission.
Yeah, and that's easy to do. That the board's done that several
Without
times
having
this
the
year.
other non-zoning related ordinances on that same agenda, you want to have everything at the end.
Because otherwise we'll be talking about this forever. Okay? Thank you for all the hard work. Thank the commission members for all the hard work, which they are turning into action, which we really appreciate. Great. Okay, the next item on the agenda is discussion and update on the all-in Glencoe comprehensive plan process. And we have the plan chair, Bruce Hubbard, and on video, we have Lee Brown, and then also our development services manager, Taylor Baxter, to present. And before you start, let me just say, one thing I want to make sure we talk about is we had a presentation, not last meeting, but the meeting before that, by a young man who was doing a project on first floor business district uses. And he told us that we were, as compared to our neighboring communities, lax about what we allowed on the first floor. And I think at the time, although we can talk about it at length, board members, and this includes me, were interested in what we should do to protect our first floor uses so that they're uses that we want. Restaurants, sales tax generating uses, traffic generating uses, rather than just pick on now with banks and real estate offices or Scientology readings. So anyway, keep that. Okay.
Before we jump into all this, as I guess you call it, special advisor to the commission, I came across a very short quote that I'd like to add to the record, if I may.
Anyway,
I'm finding since I broke my leg, I have more time to read books than normal. And I came across this very, very short paragraph. The Knight Foundation recently contracted with Gallup organization to explore what makes people love where they live and why that matters. They studied 26 communities and interviewed 43,000 people. They found that people feel most attached to their community because of three variables. Social offerings, that is, places where people can meet and greet each other. Openness, how welcoming the community is to different types of people and stages of life. And aesthetics, the physical beauty of the community, including parks and open space. They also found that the more opportunities people had to connect and beautify their communities, the better the town performed economically.
thanks. And before we start, let me just add, although he's not required to present, we have the chair of our zoning board, Scott Novak, here. So he got to listen to the thing we're dumping on him about preservation. So, and now he can listen to the rest of this, which also we're going to be dumping on him and his group. Okay, Taylor.
Thank you, President Rowan. So as you are all well aware, in 2022, the board directed the Plan Commission to start the process of updating the comprehensive plan, which has not had a comprehensive and a full update since 1996. That 1996 plan had a 20-year intended horizon. We're well past that, so this is an overdue process, and we're now approaching 1 year into this process. It's intended to be an 18 to 24 month process. And so as we hit that 1 year mark, we wanted to come back to the board, bring you up to speed on what's been done so far, where we are now, and where the process is going. That conversation is going to involve a review of the public outreach that's been done so far, an outline of the plan framework, which is really how the plan is being organized. That is starting with big ideas. We have 5 big ideas. And under each of those ideas are goals and objectives. We'll talk about those briefly, pull out a few that are really ripe for discussion, and then finally get your feedback on where we're going for the next 6 to 12 months. We do have Chairman Hubart here. We have Lee Brown from Hesk Associates, who's our consultant, one of our lead consultant here for this plan, as well as 2 other members of the Plan Commission. And Peter's still here. Here he is. Commissioner, board member, listener, and Van Vechten, and Scott Novak is here as well as Trustee Armstrong as well. So in the interest of time, Lee, are you taking the next slide from here? I do have
So if I can just ask that you keep it moving along, that would be helpful. Good evening. Thank you very much for accommodating my absence and my virtualness. I will try to move this as fast as possible given the time. What's on the screen now should be the initial flow, essentially, of how we were going to go about this process. And we're at the sort of pretty close to the midpoint in which we are initiating more detailed review of sub areas within the community. The document that you have in your packet is a draft that evolved out of considerable identification of the goals and objectives that existed in the previous comprehensive plan, plus the addition of substantial new statements that evolved out of what we heard from the community and from sort of the best practices that are now the way we look at comprehensive plans, which are different than the way comprehensive plans were developed or their focus back in 1996. If you can go forward. So we're focusing tonight on the higher levels of this, the goals and objectives. We actually have begun with the commission to begin to look at the issues of strategies, but that seemed you would have a even longer document to review tonight. And we thought it made most sense for us to raise this up at the goals and objectives level to try to give you a sense of the direction that we've begun to take. Next slide.
That says community vision there. What got cut off? Vision there.
You will ask, how does this comprehensive plan differ from the existing one? And we're calling out sort of 3 areas that a combination of change that we're seeing nationally about the way we do comprehensive plans, and more importantly, what we've heard from the community. And this plan is likely to have a stronger focus on sustainability and climate change. Second, we are more aware now than we were 20 or more years ago of issues of equity and inclusion, and those you will see are built in or woven into the goals and objectives as we prepared them. And then third, a recognition of accommodating multiple generations, the notion that housing needs to address not just those who can most afford it, but also provide a wider range that accommodates varying ages and capabilities for residents and future residents of the community. Next slide. So rather than go line by line, given the hour, we're going to try to point out some topical areas within the goals and objectives that we think should be of interest. So next slide. So as Taylor indicated, we have 5 big ideas, and so we're going to organize this discussion through those big ideas. The first of which is to build upon Glencoe's character. There's a long list of objectives underneath this, but we're going to pull out some of those that we think are important. Then the first one is to pursue policies that preserve historic homes and the existing supply of moderately sized homes in order to maintain a diversity of housing types. How's that for a topical issue? The second is having been through at least one significant redevelopment in the community that we struggled to address a relatively complex property, the recommendation is likely to come out to at least consider or evaluate the potential for a planned development ordinance to accommodate more complex redevelopment in the village's future. The third is to update zoning and development regulations to encourage small and mid-sized multifamily residential development in the RD district. I can either pause or keep moving along. I'll take your direction on that.
Is RD currently 60 feet?
RD is the multifamily district
multifamily.
along.
Oh, it's I'm sorry, that's multifamily. Got it. Okay. Yeah, no, keep going.
So we're not
Keep
looking
going.
at a change of the intent, but we're saying to ourselves, how do we encourage it with less friction of getting it done? The second big idea is to integrate sustainability into all those things that we do, and to encourage more sustainable construction and building practices, which might be modifying standards or encouraging folks to become more aware of sustainable construction practices. The second is to continue to investigate options for a future water supply treatment, which includes building a new plant, rehabbing the current plant, or developing a solution through intergovernmental cooperation. The third big idea is to maintain economic resilience, proactively prepare for the future of frontage road properties, which we hope recognizes that we don't want to assume that the automobile industry will forever be in the same condition that it currently is, and we just want to be ready for if or when that might occur. And the other item being consider opportunities to improve or redevelop the Hubbard Woods Plaza area. We're seeing some development that's occurring now, but the balance, the larger plaza itself, potentially could support a greater variety of activities. Next slide. Big idea to care for this and support the community. I think the commission has recognized that this comprehensive plan is not just about land use. It's about creating a supportive community and to address the issues of quality of life. And so one of the big objectives is to attract diverse residents, visitors, and workers by proactively creating a welcoming environment that allows everyone to have a quality of life, work, and visiting experience. And I think that is similar to what you just heard from Dudley, is one of the major elements that makes communities attractive. And then the last big idea is to deliver excellence in planning, management, and governance to ensure that the 10-year community investment program is synced with and responsive to the comprehensive plan, and to continue to build on the success of the community-focused nature of our public safety department. Go ahead, next slide. So where are we? We are looking forward in the next few months to being more specific about how that affects certain sub areas within the communities, the first of which is going to be the Green Bay Road corridor and the Hubbard Woods Plaza area. And then we'll work into both the downtown, looking at it, at least have changes occurred since the last update, and also the highway frontage area. And then we'll get into actual document present, so that in the beginning of next year, you'll start seeing a draft of the overall document. Next slide. Don't know why the titles are falling off the end. So again, rather than going line by line by line, I hope that if you have concerns or specifics within the text that we sent to you, we really look forward to your feedback on those. But we raise these three questions for this evening. Is the comprehensive plan process on the right track regarding public input and the scope, content of the big ideas and the issues, topics being considered? Second, how well do the draft goals and objectives address the big ideas? And then third, what should the planning team's priorities be as it moves through the remainder of the process? And I'm turning it back to you.
All right. I want to make sure that, I think the answer is, this all sounds like it's on track to me, but I want to make sure Bruce has a chance to say his piece.
Well, we have such great consultants, half the members of the plan commission are here tonight, so we discussed this quite a bit at the plan commission, these goals and objectives. We're guided a lot by what we hear from the community. We have community input, we had surveys, we've had open houses, and so we feel like we have a very good pulse on what the community is telling us. A lot of the effort that we go through is shaping the nature of the statements, the particular statements under goals and objectives. We keep being reminded of new vantage points that we hadn't thought of. For example, Dudley keeps reminding us that the village is getting older. So when we think about that, then we go back and we look at the goals and objectives and we say, what are we doing about the fact that the population of the village is getting older? So I think right now the plan commission feels that we have captured the spirit of the community's input. And, we're not happy with everything. We've reserved judgment on the last goal. We think that maybe some more needs to be fleshed out in terms of the public services that we provide. I know one of the things that Lee abstracted there was Hubbard Woods Plaza. We have these sub-area plans to do, but under economic resilience, we did talk a great deal about downtown also, and some of the concerns you're expressing were addressed there as well. So really, one of the things that I've been trying to stress with this is that when we end up with the final document, the document isn't really a plan. It is, but the document is only going to be good if we use it. That's what everyone on the plan commission keeps saying. And so I've suggested that we have an annual meeting of the plan commission hereafter, always to update this plan, to look at it, not think of this as a 5 or 10 year effort that we do when we put away. We talked about having the final result be an interactive document online so that we're not trapped with just a bound document. Those are some of the thoughts we've had. I don't know, Scott, you've been on the plan commission meetings, so.
Yeah, no, I think you summed it up well. I don't really have anything to add there.
Thank you to both. Lee, I'm not sure where you are there.
That's the front of our front door. I'm standing out in the street.
I hope it doesn't mean you've been kicked out of the house, Brady. But it looks like a nice evening. Look, it seems to me you guys are absolutely on track. And the issues that are identified are issues that we are thinking about. And it sounds like, just as examples, what are we going to do with our multifamily district? Because we just had a big brawl last year about, a property that borders on single family and multifamily, and everybody went crazy, which I get that. But we want to think about this in an organized way. We are currently thinking about what we're doing about water, which is a huge issue. We're currently thinking about what we need to do, and we want advice on how to deal with what I call the uptown and other people call the downtown business district. So all of this is great and it's helpful. And one way I think it would be able to help is as we get issues, instead of deciding them on an ad hoc basis, it'd be nice to pull out the plan and say, well, here's what all these people have thought about, and this can guide the way we think about it. So I think you're absolutely on track. Keep it up. What other people, does anybody have any comments about how they should keep going beyond what we talked about? Well, okay, is there anything else you think?
I think the plan commission could do some snacks also, because we have long meetings, we don't have the same support that we got here. I think
Just, there you go. Okay, there is, the only remuneration we get is the swag that a couple of our board members are wearing, and proudly, and which, by the way, I wore one of those at our Tuesday meeting. And when we have a meeting that goes from 5:30 into the evening, we get sandwiches. So that's it. So if you have to schedule a meeting that starts before dinner starts and ends way afterwards, talk to Corral.
We might have a few leftovers.
So, all right. Thank you, Lee, Bruce, Scott, for being here and for all the work you guys have done. Thank you also for waiting for us to finish the long first part of this, which I wish maybe next time we'll flip it and torture bad victims.
We're used to Peter.
I think, so thank you, and then keep going. And that, I think, concludes the discussion on the comprehensive plan. Is there any other business before we adjourn? I don't see any. Is there a motion to adjourn our committee of the whole?
Motion to adjourn committee of the whole.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? We're adjourned until 7 o'clock. Thanks, everybody, for coming.